Ivaretika, which is really the blessings, what we call the Aaronic blessings, the priestly blessings. Sometimes, well, most times in Christianity, it's referred to as the benediction. All right, it's quite an important prayer, the priestly prayer, the benediction. But it's the Aaronic prayer. It's a prayer that it's a blessing actually that God gave to Moses to give to Aaron to be pronounced over the sons of Israel. All right, so it's you know, sometimes we do it. As a younger man, I used to pray every day for my children with the Aaronic blessing over them when they were younger, and perhaps I need to continue praying the Aaronic blessings over them. So some people, and especially in the Jewish community, they would pray on Shabbats, the Aaronic blessings, the Ivaretika over their children on Shabbats, and that's a good tradition. But I think we should keep in mind here that it's really for Aaron, the priest, to pray and to bless the children of Israel with that particular blessing. All right, so I'm a contextual person. I like to keep the Bible in its proper context. I believe there's a tremendous value in keeping things in context. Not that you can't go outside of the context in the Bible, but you should never stray away from the proper context and determine to do it any way, or to interpret, or to handle the Bible, or to treat the Bible in any form when there's a clear context to be given to. So I like to keep things in context, and in context, the sons of Aaron, the priestly tribe, the priests, the Kohanim, is to announce or to pronounce this blessing over the children of Israel. So today, at this time of the year, and other times of the year, in fact, the sons of Aaron today, and they're known as Cohen, they have the name Cohen. Some of them would have the last name Levi. They would take a position of priestliness over the Jewish congregations, and they would pronounce the Ivaretika. Sometimes they would sing it. There's about 3 or 4 different ways to chant or to sing the Aaronic blessings. And so it's good. It's in context, it's that way. But there's a prophetic application to this, and usually there is, right? I'm always open and looking for the prophetic context or the prophetic application of Scripture. And there's a prophetic application to this. You know, God became very, very discouraged about the sons of Aaron. It began very early. In the wilderness even, he began to be very discouraged with the sons of Aaron. And then later on in the life of Israel, in fact, the sons of Aaron began to transgress against God. And God eventually stated that he was going to reject the sons of Aaron to be priests. But he had chosen the priesthood of Zadok, or what's known as the Zadokite priesthood. These are the sons of Zadok. Who was Zadok? Anybody knows who Zadok was? Zadok was the high priest, a son of Aaron, the high priest, during the time of King David. And Zadok won a special place of appreciation with God. God honored him and gave him an eternal promise that his sons will perpetually be priests before him. And almost to the point of excluding the other sons of Aaron. Now this actually goes back to Phinehas. Remember the story of Phinehas in Numbers chapter 25? What happened? Well, the Kohanim were not showing signs of fervency before God. But Phinehas, at that most critical time, this was when the children of Israel, sons of Israel, had began to transgress against God and worship the Baal at Baal Peor. So this happened at Peor, the worship of Baal at Peor. What happened? Well, Moses stood apart and he was grieving over what he was seeing. I mean, 40 years in the wilderness, transgression after transgression, rebellion after rebellion, and suddenly they're at the threshold of the land of Israel, and the sons of Israel fell right into gross iniquity. So Moses was taken back. He was weeping before God. And Phinehas, this son of Aaron, Phinehas, took a spear and he took action, right? So that's the essence of the story with Phinehas. He took action. And what did he do? He stopped the sin. He stopped the curse that was upon the children of Israel. So God said concerning Phinehas that I'm going to make you an eternal promise. Your sons will be priests. And lo and behold, you have Zadok, who is a direct descendant of Phinehas. And so God made a promise to Zadok. Right. So what about the Zadokite priesthood today? We don't know who are sons of Zadok today. They're all sort of mixed in or conjoined with the other sons of Aaron. And so you have a very broad scope of Jewish people that are sons of Aaron. But God said that he would reject the sons of Aaron to be priests. When you see that in Ezekiel chapter 42, I think it is, it's striking, it's very vivid, and it's almost sounds like he's rejecting, and that's what in fact, that's what he's doing. He's rejecting them to be priests. Now we know from a New Testament context that God has chosen that the church should be a royal priesthood. And that's very important for us. Peter referred to us as a royal priesthood. This royal priesthood is the essence of Melchizedek, the priesthood of Melchizedek. Because Melchizedek means a righteous king, a royal priest. So the order of Melchizedek has to do with a righteous priest and king, the three offices, right? Well, you include prophet, priest, and king. So this is the order of Melchizedek. We know that Yeshua is the high priest according to the order of Melchizedek. We also know from Psalm 110 that this was a position chosen for him from the very foundation of the world. In other words, more than likely, when he was determined to be the Lamb of God, he was also determined to be the high priest of this order, the order of Melchizedek, royal priesthood. So now, the whole revelation, the scope of revelation that we have in the New Testament about the church being a royal priesthood, it's very, very exclusive. It's very exclusive to the writings of Peter and the book of Revelation. Those are the only two places you see it. What does that tell us? We don't see it in the gospel at all. There's a wealth of revelation that Jesus presents, but we don't see the reality of a royal priesthood anywhere in the gospels. Not in the book of Acts, not in the book of Romans. Paul didn't put much or any emphasis on the church being a priesthood at all. Peter did. And then John in the book of Revelation. Now let's talk about the book of Revelation quickly. The book of Revelation, we see there in Revelation chapter 1, verse 1 and 2, that the book of Revelation was all revelation that was given to Jesus by God. So we'll consider that for a moment. God gave Jesus a very specific revelation at a very specific time. The purpose of that revelation, of course, was to enlighten. That's what a revelation is. That's what a revelation does. It enlightens. So Jesus, put it in this context, was enlightened by God with that revelation, the entire book of Revelation. And that revelation was given to John so that we can have the revelation of Jesus, which was given to him by God. So consider it from that perspective. So the revelation of Jesus given to him by God has quite a few times in there, at least actually 3 times, where the church is actually a priesthood. But Peter had that revelation before, as far as we know. Because the First Peter was written before the book of Revelation was written. So I'll say this, more than likely, the revelation concerning the church's priesthood, the order of Melchizedek, this royal priesthood that will actually take the place of the Kohanim, the sons of Aaron, that this revelation was new when Peter received it. Perhaps Peter was the first one to receive it. We don't know. Perhaps this revelation was circulating among the church at that time. But there was something that was added at a certain time, and it's a very important revelation, right? We know how revelation works. Revelation is given as we progress on in the things of God. So at the beginning of the church, even during the time of the ministry of Messiah, it wasn't revealed that the church would actually become this royal priesthood according to the order of Melchizedek, and will in fact stand before God in the place of Aaron and his sons. I know that's a bold statement, but you search it out yourselves. See what Ezekiel said concerning the sons of Aaron. how he will reject them, but he will choose the sons of Zadok. What's the importance of Zadok in a prophetic sense? Remember who Zadok was. He was the priest, high priest, during the time of King David. So there was a picture there of a royal priest or royal priesthood. Zadok stood alongside King David, who was a type of Messiah, Jesus, to serve alongside him. So the priesthood of Zadok, or the Zadokite priesthood, today I believe is represented in the church, or should be represented in the church. Isn't quite there yet. In fact, most of Christianity, we are completely oblivious of the fact that we are, in fact, a very important priesthood. Not just a priesthood, but a very important priesthood. Most of us are completely unaware of it. You know, this teaching concerning the priesthood of the church is not new. I talk about it a lot, but it's not new. Pastor Ken talked about it. And there were other teachers before him that put a lot of emphasis on the reality that the priesthood is a church. There's not a priesthood in the church, right? In other words, the church does not have priests that ministers over the church. What we see in the Bible is that the entire church is a priesthood. We all are priests. So, bringing that back to a prophetic context, what does that tell us about what will occur during the millennial kingdom when those of us who have overcome in this life will sit on 12 thrones and judge or rule over the house of Israel? Put it in that context. What does that tell us? That in that place and at that time, the place of Jerusalem during the millennial kingdom, we will be Kohanim, priests. The word Kohanim is priests. We will be priests over Israel. You know, we talk about in class, in our second year class, we talk about the parable of the vineyard, right? Those of you who are in the class, you should remember what we said last Tuesday and the Tuesday before, that the parable of the vineyard speaks of a people that God will raise up to minister from a standpoint of leadership over the people of Israel. Israel is the vineyard. God's not replacing the vineyard, he's replacing the ones who has taken leadership over his vineyard with a people that will be more worthy. And that's what Jesus said in the parable of the vineyard in Matthew chapter 21. So, we are that people that God will choose from among the nations to become a royal priesthood, a priesthood according to Revelation chapter 5, verse 9 or 10, a priesthood that will be upon the earth. And we will reign in the midst of Israel as priests. Now, when I say reign, it sounds like, ooh, we're going to reign over Israel. Well, the actual fact is this. We're going to serve Israel, minister to Israel as priests. As priests should do. We're not going to have our thumb upon Israel. We're not going to sit upon 12 thrones and, exercise kingship over Israel. No, we're going to serve Israel. The thrones there are judgment seats. Seats where we will sit and rule and judge over the house of Israel as priests. So, in that time, at that place, the Aaronic blessings will be applicable to Israel from us. We will pray that blessing over Israel. Can you see it? Perhaps during the millennial kingdom, every day we'll get up and we'll stand there and we'll do the Ivaretika over Israel. Perhaps. I'm serious. Perhaps that will be the case. And in that in itself, we'll have a lot of ministry. It was read here a moment ago in Hebrew. You know it well. It's the benediction. So what I'm saying is, Christians, we ought to be ready to pronounce or to pray the benediction over Israel in the age to come, because that's what probably we'll be doing. We're the priests. Now, what does that do for the natural sons of Aaron today? Are they completely done away with? Well, according to God, they are. I hate to put it that way, but yes, according to God, they are. But I don't think he will completely abandon them in the sense of service. They would have ministry, perhaps ministry responsibility relative to the temple, like the Levites had ministry responsibility relative to the temple. But the Kohanim, the priests, the sons of Aaron, they were the ones who were set apart to minister in the tabernacle, in the temple. So that's perhaps who we will be. All right? Now, that's kind of lofty, it's kind of out there, but I believe it's relevant for us to consider at this time because we are a priesthood. And in that time, we'll be more clearly recognizable as a priesthood. Even if we don't understand it now, and I don't see why we should not understand it, we should be able to perceive it, to see it, and understand it here and now. Anyway, priesthood. We'll be doing the Aaronic blessings for sure. But again, you can pray the Aaronic blessings over your wives, over your husbands, over your children. It's fine. You can do that. It's good. It's a good prayer, a good blessing. All right, so tonight's Torah portion, it's not a dry field necessarily, but it's kind of tough to work with. But except for chapter 6 of Numbers that deals with the Aaronic blessings, of course, but it also deals with the Nazarite vow. So the whole concept or the whole picture of the Nazarite and the Nazarite vow comes from Numbers chapter 6. So I figured I would talk a little bit about this. It's a subject that's relevant, not entirely relevant, but it's relevant. First of all, the Nazarite vow is for both men and women. I'm not sure if you're aware of that. It's right there in chapter 6. It's not just for guys. I mean, women can take the Nazarite vow as well. Now, the nature of the vow is as such that you have to, of course, stay away from many things and adapt many things into your life. But you know, the word Nazarite, it's made Greek, but the actual Hebrew word is nazar. Nazar, and the word nazar means to separate, or separation, to set apart or to consecrate. Nazar. So nazar simply means to separate, someone who is separated from. Separated from what? What do we think? In Israel, in ancient times, as far as we know, there's not a whole lot of information about this. There is some, even in the New Testament we see it. The one who's under the Nazarite vow, it would be obvious to everyone that he's under a Nazarite vow because he would grow his hair, he will grow his beard, and he would live in a consecrated manner. In a Nazar way, separated. He will live separated. He had to stay away from any grapes. Couldn't eat any grapes. Not even the skin of the grapes he could eat or drink any wine. So that's we don't quite understand that. We can say, okay, if it's about alcohol, then stay away from the wine. But what about not eating grapes? You can't even eat the seeds or the skin of the grapes. We don't quite understand it. So there are aspects of the Nazarite vow that we don't quite understand. Now, also concerning the Nazarite vow, the one who's under the vow, male or female, is to stay away from anyone that's unclean. So if someone is unclean, for whatever reason, sickness or whatever reason, the one under the Nazarite vow is to stay away. If you come in contact with someone who is unclean, you immediately forfeit the vow. And you shave your head and so on, and you go on to perhaps another vow or something, but that's the nature of the vow. If you touch a dead body, or it says it right there in chapter 6, if suddenly someone dies next to you and you touch them, you're unclean, that's the end of your vow. Or unclean by any means. So there are several ways by which someone can be unclean. So you don't cut your hair, you leave your beard, you let it grow for whatever period of time. Apparently, there's no set time to set oneself, to place oneself under the Nazarite vow. It can be for an extended period of time. So this is what we know about the Nazarite vow. Also, you have to bring it to an end, whenever you bring the vow to an end, with sacrifices. All right? All of the sacrifices, actually, that we find in Leviticus chapter 1 to 5. You have to bring a whole burnt offering. You have to do a meal offering. You have to do a peace offering and a sin offering, which comprises of all of the korbanot, the approaches. So it's interesting that when you break the vow, it has to be done with the application of all of the korbanot, all of the approaches. It's interesting because you shave your hair, and when you do the peace offering, the shelamim, you place your hair into the fire of the peace offering. And that's how you bring the vow to a close. Very interesting. We don't quite understand all of the applications of it. What does it actually mean in that long context. Simply, you're separating yourself. That's all we know of concerning the Nazarite vow. You're separating yourself. At the closure of the vow, when you bring the vow to an end, it's done with sacrifices. Now, the sacrifices all point to Jesus. It's interesting that each of the sacrifices are offered up at the end of your vow. I don't think that's a mistake. I think that's there for a very pointed reason. I just don't quite understand it. Why does the Nazarite vow point to all of the approaches that Jesus would make? I don't know. That Jesus would represent. Only to say that perhaps in the most perfect sense, in the most complete sense, Jesus was the complete Nazarite. He lived his life as a Nazarite, even though perhaps he didn't. What do we know about Jesus, by the way, as it pertains to wine? That he drank wine. In fact, he was accused of being, in the King James language, a wine bibber. You know what a wine bibber is? Someone who drank wine regularly. He was accused of being that. And he didn't deny it. He didn't deny it because he did drink wine.
And it initiated his ministry.
And of course, from the standpoint of the Gospel of John, the first miracle that we see from John's perspective is the wedding at Canaan. There were probably miracles before that, but from John's perspective, he initiated his ministry by drinking wine. So Mary comes to him at that wedding and says, "Hey, the wine is done. It's over." He says, "Woman, what am I to do with you? My time is not yet come." So many people look at that interaction and they treat it in different ways, right? The producer of The Chosen, he attempted to do something a little different than what I believe it actually states. And whatever, that's his interpretation of what really happened at the wedding at Canaan. I think something else happened, quite frankly. I think Mary was basically saying to him, you need to be under a Nazarite vow. There's no more wine. Stay away from it. And Jesus said, what am I going to do with you? My time is not yet come. In other words, he wasn't about to initiate a Nazarite vow. Perhaps. That's just one way of looking at it, right? Everyone has their own opinions. That's my opinion. She was being a good Jewish mom, trying to look out for her son, but he was basically saying, I'm going to produce wine here for the wedding, regardless. And he did it. So Jesus, even though he drank wine, I'm saying to you that he was probably the perfect picture of someone who is consecrated or someone who is separated. He lived his entire life in that way, particularly from the time of his baptism to the time of his ascension. He lived his life perfectly separated from the things of this world. So perhaps he was a living Nazarite, in other words. And in the case with him, he could drink the wine. Perhaps. So I'm not saying that he transgressed the vow if he did in fact take a vow, but we know that he drank wine periodically during his ministry. It's possible for 6 months during that time, the 3-year period of his ministry, he may have taken a more complete Nazarite vow. But what I'm saying to you is his entire life was one of being separated, being consecrated. He was a Nazar. And I'm not sure if there's a connection between him being the Nazri or the Natsra, the branch, and there's some word connection there, I'm not sure. But you see, he is the perfect Nazarite in his life. He lived a very consecrated life, again, even though he drank alcohol. Clearly he did. So let's look at what it says in Numbers chapter 6, at the end of the discussion, or the end of the text that we have here about the Nazarite vow. Chapter 6, verse 21. Let's read that. So all of chapter 6, before verse 21, is about the Nazarite vow. This is the law of the Nazarite who vows his offering to the Lord according to his separation. That's the word separation, Nazar. In addition to what else he can afford, according to his vow which he takes, so he shall do according to the law of his separation. There's the word separation there again. The word separation is used here more than 10 times in chapter 6 of the book of Numbers, because separation being separated is the essence of what it is to be under a Nazarite vow. Again, the words are the same. Nazarite and separation, they mean the same thing. So, this is it. Whatever and it's apparent that if he cannot afford to give all of the offerings, then he's to give whatever he can. But if he's able, he gives a sin offering, a whole burnt offering, a meal offering, and a peace offering. And the hair, again, one more time, the hair that's shaved from the man or the woman is to be placed into the fire of the peace offering. Is there something there for us to glean? Is there something for us to take away from that reality? What's the peace offering? What's the shalomim about? What does the shalomim represent? The peace offering? Okay, so let's look at it this way. At the end of your Nazarite vow, it's a vow and it's not supposed to be easy. At the end of the vow, you're offering up offerings to God. It's sort of a celebration almost. That you ended the vow, and here are the offerings that I'm making because the vow has been satisfied. The last thing you do at the end of the vow is place the hair, which represents what? The hair represents the vow. You take the hair and you put it into the fire of the peace offering. That's the last thing you do. Seemingly the most important thing in the whole process of the Nazarite vow. So what is that symbolic of? It's symbolic of something. Think about it for a moment. If the peace offering represents what? Intimacy, communion with God, oneness, shalom, right? So shalomim, peace, shalom. The word shalom or shalamim really means oneness, completeness. So if the Nazarite, the person taking the vow, male or female, is to take the evidence of their vow and place it into the fire of the shalomim, what's being said? Yeah. Right. Why the shalomim? Why the peace offering? Seems to me, placing the evidence of your vow into the peace offering is very important. It is pivotal to what it is to be a Nazarite. So the essence of the Nazarite vow from that perspective is our deep communion with God. We've drawn close to God in doing this vow. And you take the evidence of the vow, which here represents the hard work of the vow, right? And you take that and you put it into the peace offering. And the statement is obvious. God, I am one with you. Separated from the world, one with God. Does that remind us of anything Jesus said? Absolutely. So the Nazarite vow is interesting when you look at it from that point of view. I've known about 3 or 4 people that I've never taken the vow. I've known about 3 or 4 people that have taken the vow over the years, Christians. Of course, there's a bit of a difficulty in taking the vow and satisfying it perfectly because we're not going to make an offering, right? A literal offering. We're not going to offer up a lamb, sin offering, or any of those things. But it's symbolic. So our offering then represents what? Our service to God, our worship, our service, our approach to God. So the Nazarite vow can be literally carried out like the people that I know that did it. Or we ourselves can live like Messiah Jesus and live like Nazarites, people that are separated out. And every time we come together, we're placing the reality of our Nazarite vow, the evidence of it, every time we come together, we're placing it in the fire of the peace offering. And I think that's how I look at it. Like I said, I've known people who've done it, and that's fine. I'm not going to discourage anyone from doing it. I think it's good. I think, like it says there in chapter 6, it's both male and female. It'd be wonderful for a husband and wife to do it together. It'd be great. But the most important thing, I think, is to see it from a symbolic perspective, which is to say that Jesus lived his life complete as a Nazarite. Even though he drank the wine, I'm not saying that you should, but his life was that of someone who has been separated out. Nazar, which is what the word Nazar means, to be separated. And he lived like that. Now, I always say, and it's absolutely true, that Jesus expects us to live the way he did. Is that a tall order? Is that too much for us? Jesus expects us to live the way he did. You remember those bands? I have a band here. It doesn't say what would Jesus do, but remember those bands that said WWJD, is that what it said? What would Jesus do? Everyone wore those things, and we were all happy to wear them and so on. And hey, look at my band. I have a yellow one. I have a blue one. What would Jesus do? And the essence is that you're supposed to live like him. Well, that's true. So you're supposed to live a consecrated, separated out life as Jesus did, and he expects us to do it. When you read the Gospels, it's amazing because Jesus literally expects each of us to live the way he did. Would we ever meet his mark? Perhaps not. But it's a mark for us to see as a goal for our lives. It's a mark that we attain to, or we work to attain to. This doesn't sound very Christian in doctrine at all. In fact, in Christianity, that's absurd, actually. But from a gospel standpoint, it's absolutely correct. Jesus wants us to follow his example. That's why he came. That's why he lived the way he did. He came to show us the way, and that's why he said, I am the way. Follow me. That's what he said to his disciples, to Matthew, to Peter. Follow me. And that statement doesn't mean literally follow him. It can, but it means to follow his lead. Live as he lived. And I want to tell you that that's absolutely attainable. With a Nazarite vow or without a Nazarite vow. I'm not speaking against a Nazarite vow. It's in the Bible. It's very clear. Now, what about Paul? We have evidence in the Bible that Paul took a Nazarite vow. In chapter 18 of Acts, he breaks a vow. That's in Acts chapter 18. All right, maybe we should go take a peek at that in Acts chapter 18. Why not? Paul, this is Paul, the Apostle Paul, the one who founded the Christian religion, according to some. Here is the founder of Christianity, according to some. And he's taken a Nazarite vow. He's taken a vow which comes from the Old Testament. A very Jewish, a very Israeli vow. Paul, the founder of Christianity. So in Acts chapter 18, he's traveling, he's coming from Asia Minor. Actually, he's coming from the Aegean Sea, from Greece, and he's making his way back to Jerusalem at this point in his ministry. Now, in the ancient world, in fact, 150 years ago, not necessarily in the ancient world, making a pilgrimage to Jerusalem was quite involved. Right? You have to take ship, ox cart, you have to travel by land, by foot, climb mountains, get onto ships and all that to make it to Jerusalem. So here's Paul. He's on his way back to Jerusalem. He's crossed over from the Aegean Sea into Syria. But he's under a vow, and he's going to break the vow. In chapter 18, I think it's verse 18. Paul, having remained many days longer, took leave of the brethren. In other words, he departed from the brethren and put out to sea for Syria. So he's crossing across from the Aegean Sea to Syria. And with him were Priscilla and Aquila in Cenchrea. In Cenchrea, he had his hair cut, for he was keeping a vow. The only vow he would keep that involves the hair being cut, of course, is the Nazarite vow. So Paul at this point, now this is about 9 months or so before he makes it back to Jerusalem. All right, he's on a pilgrimage up to Jerusalem. So he takes a vow that he cuts in Cenchrea. Cenchrea, from what I understand, is right there on the coast, the Mediterranean, the eastern coast of the Mediterranean across from Syria, ancient Syria. So he ends a vow there, but it's apparent that after he ends the vow, he takes another vow. Because it takes him about 9 months or so to make it up to Jerusalem. Remember, along the way, he's journeying, right? His destination is Jerusalem, but along the way, he's ministering. Because after Cenchrea, after Cenchrea, he goes and he establishes a ministry, a church in Ephesus. So he's making his way to Jerusalem, but he's stopping as he goes. So he works in Ephesus to build a church, ultimately makes his way up to Jerusalem. But it's apparent that after he broke this vow or ended this vow, he took another vow, another Nazarite vow again. Why do I say that? Because what we see in Acts chapter 21 is that he ends, I shouldn't say break a vow. Break a vow is when you break it before it's time. He ends his vow a second time in Jerusalem. So it's apparent that Paul took, as far as we can see, two vows, two Nazarite vows. Yeah, so Paul, and whenever he broke that vow in Cenchrea, we don't know how long he was under that vow for. He could have been under that vow for 10 years and had that evidence of the vow, right? Which would have been very long here. Now, Jesus, we always picture Jesus to have very long hair, right? And a beard and everything else, and that kind of lends itself to him being a Nazarite or having a Nazarite vow. But he wasn't, because the night before the cross, what did he do? He drank wine. Again, I believe Jesus lived his life separated out and consecrated, so he's the epitome, he's the perfect picture, I should say, of what a Nazarite should be. But Paul took another vow again, because when he finally makes it up to Jerusalem in Acts chapter 21, James and the elders of the church challenged him and said to him, "We know that you are faithful to the law. There's a lot of things that are being said about you teaching the law among the Gentiles, and there are some here in Jerusalem that believe that you're hostile to the law. We know that you're not," is basically what they say to him. I'm paraphrasing. "So why don't you prove that you are not hostile to the law and that you're zealous for the law by ending your vow together with these brethren," I think there were 3 of them, "who were under a vow as well?" And Paul didn't resist. He went right along with it. He took their recommendation and said, "Okay, I'll do that. It's a good idea." Now, we know Paul. Paul was very straight to the point. Paul would have done nothing if it wasn't well with him, if it wasn't his will. In other words, he wouldn't have allowed himself to be forced into doing something that he didn't want to do. So James, the elder of the church, or the pastor of the church, said, "Hey, prove to everyone here that you are zealous for the law as we are, and break your vow together with these 3 men who are going to break their Nazarite vow on the temple and make offerings with them." Paul went right along with them and ended his vow a second time on the Temple Mount, made offerings. So this is Paul. So again, it's evident that after he broke his first Nazarite vow, he went back on another vow, and by the time he made it to Jerusalem, he broke his vow there on the Temple Mount. That's in Acts chapter 21, and I guess we can read it. Read it. Why don't you read it on your own? Acts chapter 21, 17 to 26. Read that on your own tonight. That's your homework. And you'll see it there. Paul was under a Nazarite vow a second time. So what can we take away from this? The Nazarite vow, at least from the perspective of the early church, was relevant and important. It was. The 3 men that took the vow and Paul took them to break the vow or to end the vow with them, they were believers. So it tells us that there were believers in that first century church that were taking Nazarite vows. Now, how do we feel about that from a Christian perspective? That the early church, Paul, was taking regular Nazarite vows. I think if the temple was in existence today, I would probably take a Nazarite vow in its complete sense, in its complete effects myself. But the temple isn't there. There's no way for me to do it according to the Bible, perfectly according to the Bible, so I won't do it. But symbolically, I am a Nazarite. You follow what I'm saying? Symbolically, I am a Nazarite because I live a separate life. I'm separated out from this world. That happened a very long time ago. And I'm no longer someone given over to this world. I'm separated. So in that sense, again, the word Nazar means to separate. I'm separated. So we ought to see ourselves, each of us, it's okay to see ourselves as Nazarites. Again, if you want to take a Nazarite vow, you can do it. I would recommend that if you offer up animals for your sacrifice, that you be careful about it. Some people would not appreciate that. But you see what I'm saying? Be a Nazarite on the inside. Be a Nazarite. Be committed, that committed on the inside. Be separated out. I think it's how I would look at it. So the Torah portion, very simple, but again, as it relates to the Nazarite vow, it's interesting. But we should all be Nazarites. Each of us should be Nazarites. Shabbat Shalom.